What if the band that sold out Shea Stadium faster than the Beatles destroyed itself trying to impress people who hated them? Grand Funk Railroad moved 55,000 tickets in 72 hours. Their manager stole millions while they survived on a few $100s a week. Sheriff's deputies seized their instruments backstage at Madison Square Garden while fans sat waiting in the dark. They fought every critic and won. Then they started listening. This is the story of how Grand Funk Railroad defeated everyone except themselves. By the summer of 1969, 3 young men from Flint, Michigan were about to change the sound of American rock and roll. Mark Farner on guitar, Don Brewer on drums, Mel Shocker on bass. No polished image, no industry connections, no critical pedigree, just volume, muscle, and a raw, uncompromising energy that nobody in the music establishment had asked for and nobody could explain. Their manager, Terry Knight, secured them a last-minute, unpaid opening slot at the Atlanta International Pop Festival on the 4th of July, 1969. They arrived as unknowns. They left as something else. Under a blazing Georgia sun, in front of a crowd that had come to see other acts, Grand Funk Railroad delivered a performance of such sheer physical force that people stopped what they were doing and simply stood there. The volume alone commanded attention. The raw conviction behind it held it. Before we continue, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Word spread through the underground rock circuit the way it always did in that era. Person to person, town to town, radio station to radio station. A major label signed them soon after. Their debut album arrived in August 1969 and immediately started selling. Not because critics endorsed it, not because radio programmers pushed it, but because the fans who had heard them play could not stop talking about what they had witnessed. Gold records followed. By 1971, they had become one of the biggest touring acts in the country. On July 9th of that year, they sold out Shea Stadium in New York, moving 55,000 tickets in 72 hours. That was faster than any band had ever done it. Faster even than the Beatles at the same venue. Mark Farner arrived by helicopter, stepped onto second base, and looked out at a crowd so densely packed that the entire stadium appeared to be physically moving. He later recalled fighting back tears, floating 3 feet above the stage, barely able to hear what the band was playing over the roar of the crowd. The fans who bought their records were factory workers and Vietnam veterans and teenagers from small towns who recognized something honest in the music, something that spoke their language without apologizing for it. The story most people remember ends right there. Working class heroes versus the elite tastemakers. Grand Funk wins, critics lose, case closed. But that version left something important out, something happening beneath the surface, quietly and persistently, even as the stadiums filled and the records sold. Something that would take years to reveal itself, and by the time it did, the band that had seemed unstoppable was already gone. From almost the moment Grand Funk Railroad began attracting serious attention, the critical establishment declared war on them. Major music publications assigned their most pointed writers to dismantle the band. The language was not merely dismissive, it was contemptuous. Terms like simplistic, talentless, and manufactured noise appeared again and again in print. One prominent critic compared them unfavorably to virtually every other band emerging from the Detroit area and suggested their music was a calculated scheme to exploit the tastes of unsophisticated teenagers. The attacks were not occasional. They were relentless. Review after review, year after year. The narrative from the critical establishment remained consistent. Grand Funk Railroad represented everything wrong with rock and roll. Terry Knight initially leaned into the hostility. He used the terrible reviews as marketing copy, framing the band as authentic voices of the working class being suppressed by cultural elitists who preferred British accents and university credentials. It gave the band an identity and a cause, and it made their fans feel that loving Grand Funk was itself an act of defiance against the gatekeepers. But Knight also made a decision with deeper consequences than anyone recognized at the time. He effectively banned the band from speaking to the press. Farner later reflected on that choice with genuine regret. We were 19 and 20 when we started, and he wanted to create a mystique, so he wouldn't let us talk to the press, something I think soured them on us right from the start. The band that was meant to protect the band's image instead isolated them. They could not explain themselves. They could only watch as the stories were written without their voices. For the millions of fans who bought their records and packed their concerts, this kind of treatment was deeply familiar. These were people who understood what it felt like to do exceptional work and be dismissed by people who had never tried to do it themselves. In that sense, Grand Funk's battle with the press was a mirror of something much larger about American life in that era. But here is the part most fans never saw. While the criticism failed to stop the crowds from showing up, it created a slow, quiet hunger inside the band. A hunger for something the concert receipts and the gold records could not provide. Validation, legitimacy, the acknowledgement that what they were doing was not just commercially successful, but artistically worthy. That hunger would prove to be one of the most powerful and destructive forces in their story. In the spring of 1972, the band sat down and examined the financial reality of their relationship with Terry Knight. What they found ended the partnership permanently. Knight had structured their original contract so that the band was signed directly to his production company rather than to the label itself. This arrangement allowed him to collect a far larger share of the album profits, while the three musicians received only a small fraction. Grand Funk had generated millions of dollars. The men who created that music were surviving on weekly stipends of a few $100s each. The decision to fire Knight was absolute. The man who had positioned himself as their protector, who had used their blue-collar identity as a marketing weapon while quietly extracting their earnings, was gone. Knight responded with the ruthlessness of someone who had planned for exactly this outcome. He filed a lawsuit against the band for $57 million, an amount calibrated not for reasonable compensation, but for total destruction. Bank accounts froze instantly. Royalties vanished into legal proceedings. Over 30 separate lawsuits accumulated as the battle expanded. The band could not access their own earnings. They could not pay their bills. They were financially paralyzed by the very system they had succeeded within. The lowest moment came on December 23, 1972, at Madison Square Garden. Grand Funk was scheduled to play a benefit concert for a drug rehabilitation center. Thousands of fans were already in their seats. Minutes before the band was due to take the stage, Knight arrived with sheriff's deputies and a court order, authorizing seizure of their instruments and equipment as partial payment for the lawsuit. He pointed at their gear and told them it was being taken. The band made a desperate choice. They played the show. They delivered everything the audience came for. And when the final note ended, Knight's crew moved backstage and hauled away every guitar, every drum, every amplifier. Knight later described his intentions without remorse, saying he wanted to give them a lesson that they weren't fooling with a fool. The legal battle finally settled in early 1974. The agreement allowed the band to keep their name, but the price was devastating. They surrendered the publishing rights to their entire early catalog. I'm Your Captain, Foot Stompin' Music, Closer to Home. Every song that had connected with a generation of working-class fans now belonged to someone else. The men who had sold out Shea Stadium faster than the Beatles were starting over from almost nothing, with the urgency of men who had no margin left for recovery. Facing financial collapse, Grand Funk Railroad made a series of decisions that permanently altered their identity. They shortened their name to simply Grand Funk. They added keyboardist Craig Frost to broaden their sonic palette beyond what the original power trio format had allowed. And they brought in an outside producer, Todd Rundgren, a studio craftsman known for his polished, precisely constructed sound, to take over their next record. Don Brewer was direct about the thinking behind the shift. The radio landscape was transforming from the underground FM format that had championed them during their rise to a new, hits-oriented approach that favored shorter, more commercially accessible songs. Their financial survival depended on making that transition. As Brewer later explained, they had gone through a devastating separation from their manager, were essentially broke, and had to adapt. There was no third option. The result was We're an American Band, released in the summer of 1973. It reached #1 on the charts. For a band that had spent years being told by the establishment that they were artistically worthless, a chart-topping single felt like a form of vindication. The label was satisfied. Radio programmers were finally paying attention. But beneath the celebration, Mark Farner was growing deeply unhappy. The raw, heavy guitar energy that had been the signature of the original Grand Funk sound was being pushed to the margins to make room for polished production and radio-friendly arrangements. The producer recalled one session moment where Farner insisted on an unorthodox guitar tone, using both pickups simultaneously in a way that created a deliberately rough sound. It was a small act of resistance in a process that had otherwise grown tightly controlled. The locomotion reached #1 in 1974. Bad Time climbed to #4 in 1975. By commercial standards, the band was thriving more visibly than it ever had. But the core audience that had discovered them at festivals and in small venues, that had stood in the Shea Stadium crowd and felt the floor shake beneath them, began sensing something missing. The music had become smoother, more accessible, and somehow less theirs. The critics still refused to grant the respect the band had been quietly chasing. The pop direction had not earned them legitimacy from the people whose approval had driven the transformation. Grand Funk had compromised their original identity, and the gatekeepers who had driven them toward that compromise had not moved an inch. By late 1974, the internal structure that had made Grand Funk Railroad seem unstoppable was fracturing in ways that no chart position could conceal or repair. The artistic tensions between Farner and Brewer had moved past philosophical disagreement and into something more fundamental. They reflected genuinely different visions of what the band was and who it existed to serve. Farner wanted to return to the heavy, guitar-driven foundation of their early work. The sound that had filled Shea Stadium and shaken the concrete. The sound that had reached Vietnam veterans and given working-class kids something to be genuinely proud of. He believed the sound was the authentic core of what they had always been. Brewer understood the commercial reality differently. Their financial survival had required the pop transition, and the numbers proved it had worked. Abandoning that direction now felt like stepping backward into a fight they could not afford to lose twice. The physical exhaustion was compounding everything. Years of relentless touring, catastrophic legal battles, financial ruin, and the constant pressure to produce chart hits had stripped away the reserves the band once carried. Brewer later admitted that the us against the world unity that had originally made them feel invincible was rapidly disappearing. The bond that had once made three musicians from Flint feel capable of taking on the entire establishment had been worn down to almost nothing. One album cover from this period told its own quiet story. The band posed inside coffins. Whether intentional or not, the image read as an honest statement about where they had arrived emotionally. The search for critical legitimacy had produced exactly the outcome the critics had always predicted, though not in the way the critics intended. Grand Funk had not failed because their music was bad. They had changed their music in pursuit of an approval that never came, and in doing so, they had introduced a tension into the band that no amount of commercial success could resolve. The fans who remained loyal felt the absence of something they could not quite name. The new listeners attracted by the pop records did not carry the same depth of connection. The middle ground between those two audiences was proving impossible to hold. By late 1975, the band had reached a silent understanding. Once their remaining contractual obligations were fulfilled, Grand Funk Railroad was finished. No dramatic announcement, no public confrontation. Just a quiet agreement between men who had built something extraordinary together and could no longer find their way back to what it had been. In early 1976, with the original band seemingly finished, an unlikely figure entered the story. Frank Zappa, one of the most intellectually demanding and critically revered musicians in American music, reached out to Grand Funk with an offer to produce their next album. The invitation was entirely unexpected. Zappa was known for his contempt for commercial compromise and his fiercely demanding approach to the studio. Grand Funk was known for exactly the kind of high-volume arena rock that Zappa's critical admirers typically dismissed without consideration. But Zappa had been paying attention for years. He genuinely believed in the band's raw power and wanted to capture it without the production gloss that had softened their recent work. Brewer recalled the appeal of the pairing. "We were looking for something off the wall and thought Frank Zappa and Grand Funk would be a very odd combination." Zappa's stated goal was documentary in nature. As he later described it, all he wanted to do was make a record which tells you exactly what they really sound like. The sessions produced music that had more in common with the Atlanta Festival performance than with anything they had released in years. For a brief time, it seemed like the original spirit of the band might survive after all, but the personal relationships inside Grand Funk were beyond saving. Brewer described a moment during the overdub sessions when both he and Farner had simultaneously reached their absolute limit. Zappa found himself in the position of trying to hold a band together long enough to finish the album they had hired him to make. He succeeded, barely. "He got us through that record," Brewer admitted. "The album was completed, but the band was not." The final moment came in an ordinary rehearsal room, without drama or ceremony. Farner recalled it with the quiet devastation of something that had been a long time coming. Brewer arrived late. When he walked in, he simply told the others he had to find something more stable to do with his life. Farner asked directly, "Are you saying the band is over?" Brewer answered, "Yep." Decades after that rehearsal room in Michigan, the story of Grand Funk Railroad demands a different kind of accounting than the one it usually receives. The critics who spent years attacking them failed completely in the open marketplace. They could not stop the fans from buying the records. They could not empty the arenas. They could not prevent the band from challenging the attendance records of the most celebrated acts in the world. By the only measure that should have mattered, Grand Funk won. But the critics succeeded in a way that nobody clearly saw until it was too late. They created a wound inside the band that never fully healed. The sustained campaign of public ridicule, year after year without relent, generated a craving for legitimacy that the fans alone could not satisfy. That craving drove decisions: the name change, the added keyboardist, the outside producer, the pop direction, the slow departure from everything that had made them original and vital. Grand Funk did not chase those changes because they had run out of ideas. They chased them because they had started to believe, somewhere beneath the surface of their confidence, that maybe the gatekeepers had a point. The deepest irony of the Grand Funk story is this: the critics never defeated them. Grand Funk defeated themselves by listening to the critics. The legacy remained larger than the critics ever wanted it to be. But the band that created it was gone, altered beyond recognition, undone not by the hostility of the outside world, but by the slow, quiet damage that hostility left inside. Grand Funk Railroad never got the critical respect they chased, but the working-class fans who filled those arenas never needed a critic to tell them what they already knew. The music reached them. It got veterans through the worst years of the Vietnam era. It gave factory towns something to be proud of. The critics lost that fight completely. The tragedy is that Grand Funk forgot it. What part of their story hits hardest for you? Drop it in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more untold stories from rock's greatest era.